Wasn't on. So I'm hoping this was working. No, I don't know how that happened. Let's just go into this a moment quickly. All right, test. Hello, hello. Anyway, I'm hoping that this is all working and that you can hear me. That would be really disappointing. Um, I think we've got it all set up right. Anyway, I realized my plug wasn't in all the way, and that's why it wasn't working initially. So the question is for you, small to mid-sized businesses, is the investment, and even in large businesses, big corporate businesses tend to spend a little more time on this and maybe a little more money. And what I'm talking about is spending time focused on your leadership team and just solely on your leadership culture. And when I say that, I mean the behaviors. The culture is all about how people behave. Most people would agree that gaining alignment on strategy, on vision, on the goals, on a project, on a new opportunity, gaining alignment on what you're doing is critical. No questions asked. I would think that, most companies would think that that's really important. Gaining that alignment, gaining that consensus, maybe making sure that everyone's in lockstep, that everybody knows what the goals are, that we're all working towards the same thing. Because if we're not all headed to the same direction, the same solution, the same end goal, the same goals, it's going to be, scattered. It's going to be haphazard. You're going to end up with people in different destinations, essentially. Think about in a car. If you've got a whole caravan of people headed to a destination, if they don't all have the correct address, then it's never going to happen. You're not all going to get to the same place. You're going to have people all over the city, or potentially, like a plane that is only a couple degrees off. If it's heading to New York and the navigation is a couple degrees off, you never know where it could end up. Washington, D.C., North Carolina, from San Diego all the way across the country, a couple degrees can take you a long way off from your exact destination. So, having the what be aligned, and the what you're doing and the why you're doing it be really critically aligned is important. What I'm here to talk about is the how. Because if you're all trying to get to New York by, let's say, tomorrow afternoon, and somebody's, they're in all different locations, and you give them, a little bit different direction, or if how they're getting there, someone says, you know what, I'm not going to fly, I'm going to drive. Well, they're going to get there much later. And that's the same thing with the how of how your leadership is actually behaving and the culture of leadership. So when I talk about culture is plain and simple. It's the behaviors that are promoted, that are talked about, that are done, that are actually it's not just what's up on the board. Here's what we expect of people. It's actually what people do, how people behave, and it's what's tolerated. It's what's ignored. So the behaviors that might be tolerated or ignored may not be the ones up on the wall, but those are impacting the productivity, the profit, the output, the engagement of your entire organization. Now, you might have 70% of your leaders really aligned in the how, but if you've got one or two who are not, that team is going to hold you back. Those teams are going to prevent you from getting to your goal on time. It's like having 70% of your leaders on the planes headed to New York from San Diego, and 30% of them in cars headed to New York. They are going to get there. Maybe they'll get there at the same time, but they probably won't have their entire team with them, because when you've got leaderships using behaviors that aren't necessarily aligned with what you want, people might leave. People disengage. And I refer to it as when your MVP is an ASS. Thank you, Pat Miller, for that. Or I also say when you've got leaders who've gotten the does not play well with others on their report card a few too many times. I know what that's like. That was me. That was me. And making shifts was, we'll talk about, how we made shifts. That's a whole different story. But getting that alignment is so critical. And so making an investment in your leadership, in taking time, spending some money, getting someone from the outside to facilitate this process and facilitate you, whether that's outside in your HR organization. And I just had some very interesting conversations this week about that, about how small to mid-sized businesses or even corporations look at HR and how they view HR. And one of the women on the call was all about what I refer to as organizational development, that HR has its transactional responsibility. It has its security, safety, compliance, and safety and security are not always part of HR sometimes, but that compliance kind of side of things. And when done really well, when done, I think, appropriately, human resources should be about building your organization, developing the people in the organization, not just training. It's ensuring that the culture, that the people are all engaged and aligned in the how as much as in the what. And so and I believe that it's leadership's responsibility. It isn't HR's responsibility. HR is the enables you and helps you and gives you tools and guidance, but it is the leader's responsibility to be responsible for both the what is the vision, the what, the why, and the how. I don't know if everybody agrees with me. I'd be very curious. If you're watching this, I'd love a comment. If you're watching the replay, type replay in the comments and if you agree. But I really do believe, and I actually have seen it, if you don't have a good organizational development person in your organization, if you don't have a skilled and experienced organizational development person, getting someone from the outside can be so helpful. But there's also some things that you can do. Think about what do I really value? If you've already identified the values, what are the values? And how do those values translate into behavior? And get explicit with your leaders on how you want the how to be expressed with your teams. I mean, it doesn't have to be a robotic how that everybody's exactly the same, but the underlying essence of it, the approach, the values beneath it need to be aligned. And some of it is such common sense. Treating others as you'd like to be treated. I always say nobody wakes up in the morning wanting to be a jerk at work. Nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to be the asshole today. There's a lot of reasons that these things start to occur. Some of them are skills versus talents, which, maybe I'll do a separate, I think I've done one on this, but maybe I'll do a live in the future on, when people develop skills that aren't aligned to their core talents, those skills take so much more energy and people don't usually realize it. And those skills, when they take all that energy isn't available for someone to be present, for someone to be engaged, for someone to be actually, respectful and, they tend to start to get into a stress response. And the stress response then puts us into this fight, flight, or freeze. And so when we're in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, our prefrontal cortex goes offline, isn't available, and we tend to then behave in ways that aren't helpful. And oftentimes this stress response, if this skill that we're doing, I saw on LinkedIn earlier today, someone talked about how, they had learned this concept of skill versus talent from a leader. They said to her, you could spend the next 5 hours developing this spreadsheet, or you could give it to me and I'll have it done in 10 minutes. I'm telling you, I could so relate to that. I can do spreadsheets. I actually got really good at them. I could not do them fast. It took, there were often errors. I had to be so meticulous, and they drained my energy. And I didn't even realize this, because when I was a project manager early on in my career, a project plan is just like a spreadsheet. And I didn't realize that a lot of the does not play well with others on my report card, quote unquote, the feedback that I was getting that was not positive was a lot of that misalignment of skills versus talents. My core talents, my capability, what I am naturally good at is not project plans, is not, spreadsheets. I can do them. I got really good at them. And so often we build skills in people that, they do something and they're like, we decide we're going to build more skill around this, when in fact, really looking at what those talents are is really more important. Let's circle back to, I don't always follow my notes here, so I get off on a tangent a little bit. I really want you to think about, what investment are you making in the how things get done? Really looking at developing a very intentional culture. What are the values and behaviors that you want your leadership team to exhibit? And how can you build the trust amongst your team to be able to encourage healthy conflict, to get to the commitment and accountability that you need in order to actually hold people accountable to those values and behaviors that you develop? And there's different ways to go about it. And I really want to encourage you to think about whether you bring someone in from the outside. I'd love to help you if you need that assistance. I've done it for several different organizations. I did it internally at Harley when I was there. I've done it for other organizations as well. Helping to, bring an outside perspective and be able to allow a leadership team to just be in the process can be really valuable, can be a very valuable thing. But I want you to think about getting intentional about identifying the values and the behaviors that show those values, and really being intentional about building that into your organizational culture overall. And it starts with your leaders. I have talked about before, and I think I put this in one of my posts, that your leaders can and should be forced. What I refer to, and what somebody referred to me as actually at one point in my career, as a force multiplier, so that their way of leading actually, instead of creating output, if they have a team of 7 people, instead of getting 7 people worth of output, they're a force multiplier, that they are now getting output of 10 people, and not by overworking those people. They are a force multiplier. They are able to bring such connection and engagement and focus and motivation that the things that don't need to get done fall away, The things that aren't the priorities fall away. And that isn't through white knuckling and forcing and focusing just on compliance. That is done through building trust, encouraging healthy conflict, really getting to a commitment in the room for all of your leaders, all of your team members, all of their team members. Get intentional about your values, your behaviors, the behaviors that you want and expect of your leaders. Because otherwise, as you start to grow in a small to mid-sized business, so much focus is on operations and execution that we tend to leave some of these things till later, till we have time, till we have budget, till we whatever, till we're bigger. But if you can do this early on in your business and really make it an intentional, a very conscious part of building the organization, then it will grow with you. You've got such a solid foundation. Just as critical as processes are to an organization's growth, having standard operating procedures, having standard, things of what gets done, having standards around how things get done will accelerate your business growth like you can't even believe. I am excited to see what your thoughts are about this. Excited to help anyone who could use a little assistance in getting more intentional with the how of you do leadership, and not just the what or the why. The what and the why are very critical. And I know some people only focus on the what. What are we doing? And, when is it going to be done? And what are the pieces? And who's going to do what? The why and the how are so critical. Today, we just talked a little bit about the how, and spend some time on that. Spend some time on observing what is the current state. Observe what are people doing today. What's great, what's working, and what's not. And craft that into a culture statement, a culture, manifesto, if you will. Whatever, if it's a list of here's the key behaviors that we expect. And how can you not just do it as a one-time event? How can you do it where it is something that is a living, breathing, that you're always coming back to? Whether it's, when I worked for Hewitt Associates, benefit of the doubt was one of the key values. And they even acronymed it to BOD. People wouldn't even say benefit of the doubt anymore. They just said the BOD. And, that can be something that is very observable. Are people jumping to conclusions, or are they giving people the benefit of the doubt? Are they, reacting to things, or are they giving people the benefit of the doubt? That's just one example. Trust. How are people building trust in the organization? How are people behaving? If integrity is a key value, what does that actually look like in behaviors in terms of how people lead? That's my challenge for you today. That's my encouragement for you today. If you would like some outside assistance, DM me. Let's talk, and let me share with you how this force multiplier program, how getting your leaders into an aligned culture can become the force multiplier and accelerate your growth as a business.